The morning had been crisp and clear when Ethan set out from the trailhead. His breath rose in white clouds before him, and the ground crunched under his sturdy boots. The forest around him was bathed in pale winter light, every branch and pine needle dusted with frost. There was a sharpness to the air that invigorated him, made him feel alive in a way few things could. Ethan had always loved the wilderness. It was where he felt most himself, away from buzzing phones, crowded streets, and endless noise. Out here, it was just him and the rhythm of the earth, the whisper of wind through the trees, the distant chatter of birds, the satisfying weight of his backpack against his shoulders. He knew the forecast had mentioned a chance of snow, but he had laughed it off. A few flurries, maybe. Nothing serious. After all, he had faced harsher conditions before. He was prepared, or so he believed. By noon, the sky began to change. It was subtle at first, a thickening of the clouds, a quiet stillness that spread through the forest. The birdsong faded until the only sound was the crunch of his own footsteps. Ethan glanced up, noticing how the light had turned gray, almost heavy. A chill deeper than the morning's cold seeped into his bones. Still, he pressed on. He told himself he was close to the next trail junction. If he hurried, he could make it to the ridge before dark. But then, without warning, the first flakes began to fall. At first, they were light, delicate, floating slowly to the ground. Ethan smiled, even stuck out his tongue to catch one like he had as a child. But within minutes, the snowfall thickened. The flakes came faster, heavier, swirling around him in frantic, blinding flurries. Ethan quickened his pace. Visibility dropped sharply. He struggled to keep to the trail, but the path was vanishing beneath a blanket of white. Every tree looked the same now, ghostly and distorted in the growing storm. Panic nipped at the edges of his mind. He pulled out his map, but the paper whipped violently in the wind, almost tearing from his gloved hands. His compass spun wildly. The landmarks he had planned to use, the split in the ridge, the old fallen pine, were gone, swallowed by the storm. The snow was knee-deep now, and the wind howled through the trees with a mournful, savage voice. Ethan's breathing grew ragged. His legs felt heavier with each step. He realized, with a sick twist of fear, that he was completely disoriented. Lost. The cold was beginning to bite deeper, slipping under his jacket, numbing his fingers and toes. He knew enough about hypothermia to recognize the signs: confusion, clumsiness, the temptation to sit down and just rest for a minute. He shook his head violently. He couldn't afford to stop. Not here. Not now. Through the swirling white, he could barely see more than a few feet ahead. Every direction looked the same, a shifting, featureless ocean of snow. For the first time in years, Ethan felt truly small. Helpless. Alone. He shouted into the wind, but his voice was ripped away instantly, lost to the storm's furious roar. No one would hear him. No one even knew exactly where he was. The blizzard tightened its grip, merciless and absolute. Shivering, Ethan stumbled forward blindly, praying for shelter, for a miracle, for something, anything to guide him home. And in that moment, just when the darkness seemed ready to swallow him whole, he saw it. A flash of movement. A great, powerful bird, an eagle, perched boldly on a rock, unfazed by the chaos around it. Their eyes locked for the briefest instant. Then, with a majestic beat of its wings, the eagle lifted into the air and glided through the storm. Ethan's heart pounded. Maybe it was a hallucination. Maybe he was losing his mind. But deep inside, something whispered, "Follow." With what little strength he had left, Ethan staggered after the eagle, chasing its fading shadow into the heart of the storm. The storm showed no mercy. What had begun as a whisper of snow hours ago had grown into a raging tempest, and Ethan felt it in every fiber of his body. The wind tore at his layers of clothing, driving icy needles of sleet into exposed skin. Each step forward was a battle. His boots sank deep into drifts that rose above his knees, and the unending gray of the whiteout erased any sense of direction. His breaths came in ragged gasps, clouds of vapor vanishing instantly into the roar around him. He could feel his fingers dulling, the tips of his toes burning fiercely from the cold. Every instinct screamed to find shelter, anything to escape the brutal wind, but the forest around him was a maze of identical trunks, their branches bowed low with snow. Every potential refuge was buried or too exposed. Ethan's heart hammered as he forced himself onward. He tried calling out, but his own voice sounded hollow and distant, swallowed by the storm's fury. His head ached, and for a moment he considered collapsing, letting the storm claim him. But then he remembered the promise he'd made to himself: he would survive. He had to survive. He paused, leaning heavily against a frost-coated pine. The map in his pocket was worthless now, its ink blurred, the paper stiff with ice. His compass spun like a toy in a toddler's hand, incapable of pointing true in the crashing storm. Panic clawed at his chest, and he realized with a jolt that he was slipping toward hypothermia's grip. His thoughts were growing foggy, his limbs unsteady. Shaking off the fear, Ethan reached inside his pack and fished out a small pocket knife. He cut a length of cord from his gear, tying it to his wrist like a safety tether. If he fell, he might crawl back along his own line. It was a feeble comfort, but it gave him something tangible to hold on to. He pressed forward again, every sense intent on survival. Then, through the chaotic swirling of snowflakes, he caught it, a dark shape against the infinite white. He blinked, convinced it was another trick of his freezing mind. Yet there it was again, steady, silent, commanding. A golden eagle, its broad wings spread like a banner, perched on a jagged outcrop of rock. Ethan froze. The bird sat motionless, as though carved from the very stone it rested on, untouched by the gale that pounded the landscape. Its keen eyes met Ethan's through the storm, and in that moment he felt a spark of clarity pierce the haze of his exhaustion. Had he imagined it? He blinked, and the eagle remained. Summoning the last reserves of his strength, Ethan pointed toward the bird. "I'm coming," he shouted, but the sound vanished instantly. Undeterred, he angled his path toward the outcrop. Snow oozed into his boots, chilling him to the bone. His legs trembled, his lungs burned. Yet with every staggering step, the eagle lifted off, gliding a few yards ahead before beating its wings to hover again. It was as if the bird beckoned him onward, guiding him through the storm. Ethan followed, forced to ignore the numbness that crept up his calves and the dizzying swirl of flakes that threatened to drag him under. At times he lost sight of the eagle altogether. Had it vanished? But then, as if concerned for him, the bird would reappear, gliding low over the snow, a dark silhouette against the oppressive gray. Memories flickered through Ethan's mind, summers spent watching birds of prey glide on thermal currents, the freedom of riding unseen winds. He remembered feeling weightless then, and now, against all odds, he felt that same surge of hope. He gripped his cord tether tighter, steadied himself, and kept going. Hours seemed to pass in this relentless chase. His body quivered uncontrollably, and the edges of his vision darkened. Still, the eagle persisted. It never darted off but maintained a steady pace, as though it knew exactly where safety lay hidden in the storm. Finally, when Ethan thought he could go no further, he saw it, a narrow cleft in the rock face, half hidden by drifts and ice. The eagle arced gracefully over the gap and disappeared inside. With a final, exhausted push, Ethan limped to the entrance. The roar of the wind lessened, muffled by the rock walls. He stumbled across the threshold and collapsed against the cold stone, snowflakes melting on his face like tears. Behind him, the storm raged on, but here, inside this hidden hollow, he found a fleeting peace. Ethan lay there, every muscle trembling, as the eagle's distant cry echoed once through the cave's mouth. He realized that he would not have found this sanctuary on his own. Something had guided him, something wild, fearless, and wise. And for the first time since the blizzard began, Ethan felt a surge of real hope. He was not yet safe, but he was no longer lost to the storm. He had followed the eagle, and it had led him to shelter. Ethan awoke to a cavern hushed and surreal. The roar of the blizzard outside had softened to a distant roar, muffled by thick stone walls. His clothes were stiff with ice, his breath came in shallow puffs. For a moment, disorientation threatened to pull him back into despair until he saw it again, the golden eagle, perched on a ledge high above him, its dark eyes gleaming in the pale light that filtered through the cave's mouth. The bird spread its great wings and tilted its head, as if beckoning Ethan onward. He stiffly rose to his feet, every joint protesting, and he limped toward the back of the cave. The dim interior was surprisingly spacious, with a narrow passage just beyond the main chamber. The eagle shifted its stance and, with a soft, commanding cry, slipped into the gloom. Something in that clear, resonant call stirred Ethan's resolve. He tightened his grip on the cord tied around his wrist, the only tether to his former certainty, and took his first hesitant steps down the shadowy corridor. The walls here were smooth and cold, and droplets of meltwater dripped from above, but the passage felt safe, an invitation, rather than a trap. With each footfall, Ethan's panic eased. The simple act of moving toward something felt like reclaiming part of himself. He stumbled only once, his boot catching on a hidden root or crack, but he righted himself and pressed on. The eagle's silhouette floated ahead, ghostly yet steadfast, guiding him deeper into the rock. After what felt like an eternity, the tunnel opened into a second chamber. Here, the roar of the wind was gone entirely. Instead, a faint glimmer of light revealed a small pool of clear water, fed by a trickle seeping through the stones above. Ethan knelt and cupped his hands, drinking gratefully as the cold water stung his dry throat. He filled his canteen, each swallow reviving a bit more strength. The eagle watched from a high perch, its feathers ruffling gently. Despite its wild majesty, it exuded a calm assurance, as though it knew this sanctuary's secrets. Ethan allowed himself a small, grateful smile. The bird was no mere hallucination of hypothermia's fevered edge, it was a guide, a symbol of something larger than his struggle. Rested enough to continue, Ethan refilled his pack's water bladder and rose. The eagle took flight with a quiet whoosh, leading him onward down a narrowing passage. Ethan followed, steadying himself against the rocky walls. Here and there, faint footprints, perhaps left by mountain goats or deer, dotted the floor, confirming that others had found refuge here before. At last, the passage ended at a hidden exit high on the cliff face. Through the narrow mouth, Ethan could make out the swirling storm outside, still fierce but receding. The eagle hovered just beyond the threshold, waiting for him. Gathering his courage, Ethan stepped into the storm's edge. The wind lashed at him, but he felt steadier now, rooted by the eagle's example. With one last nod to his silent guide, Ethan climbed out onto a narrow ledge. The world beyond, white and tumultuous, called him forward. Holding the cord's other end as a lifeline, he began his descent, trusting that the eagle's path would lead him not only toward safety, but back to the life he had thought lost. And all the while, high above, the golden eagle circled once in majestic arcs, as if blessing his journey home. Ethan's limbs ached with cold and exhaustion, yet when he emerged into the narrow cleft in the cliff face, relief washed over him like warm sunlight. The roaring wind of the blizzard was muted here, muffled by ancient stone walls that rose on either side. Snow swirled beyond the cave mouth, but inside lay a hollow carved by centuries of erosion, an unexpected refuge in the heart of the storm. He stumbled forward, pressing his back against the damp rock. His breath came in ragged gasps as he peeled off his gloves and shook numb fingers, trying to coax feeling back into them. The cave floor was uneven, strewn with small stones and thick tufts of dried grass that peeked through the thin layer of snow. Beside him, the jagged entrance slanted inward, as if the mountain itself had yielded a single secret haven. Above, on a ledge slick with ice, the golden eagle waited. Its feathers were dusted with snow, but it stood unruffled, watching Ethan with those ancient, unblinking eyes. For a heartbeat, man and bird regarded each other in mutual acknowledgement, two survivors bound by the same wild landscape. Ethan sank to his knees and brushed at the grass, creating a small bed. He wrapped his arms around his knees, closing his eyes just long enough to feel the damp earth beneath him. All around, the cave walls glimmered with faint mineral veins, and somewhere in the back, he heard the soft drip of meltwater. It was the sound of life, tiny, persistent, miraculous. Drawing strength from the shelter, Ethan uncurled and stood. He pressed his palm against the cool stone and traced a path toward the cave's far side. There, shielded from the worst of the wind, a trickle of water seeped from between two boulders, collecting in a shallow depression. He knelt and filled his bottle, careful not to slip on the icy stones. Each sip warmed his dry throat and injected a spark of hope into his blood. He glanced at the eagle, whose sharp gaze never left him. Ethan realized that the bird had not only led him here, it was waiting to ensure he made it inside. The thought brought tears to his eyes. A creature born to the wild had shown him compassion the likes of which he had long forgotten. Exploring further, Ethan discovered charred remnants of a small fire pit and the stub of a wooden stake driven into the stone, evidence that other travelers had once known this cave shelter. A faded ribbon, tangled in a rock crevice, caught his eye. He tugged gently and unraveled a length of bright fabric, the only color in this monochrome world. He wrapped it around his wrist alongside the cord tether, a makeshift talisman against fear. Night began to fall outside, turning the cave interior a dusky slate. Ethan gathered handfuls of dried grass and dead branches that had somehow held through the storm. With trembling fingers, he sparked a small flame on a flat stone and fed it slowly, coaxing warmth into the dark. The fire sputtered and then roared to life, sending gentle orange light flickering across the walls. Maximizing his scant provisions, Ethan rationed the few protein bars and dried fruit he carried, washing each bite down with water. As energy returned to his body, he arranged his pack as a pillow and wrapped himself in his parka, leaving only his face exposed to the cold. The fire's glow danced across his closed lids as exhaustion claimed him. In the semi-darkness of his dreams, Ethan saw the eagle again, but this time it stood on a sunlit crag, wings outstretched against a calm blue sky. Below him lay a valley of green forests and winding rivers, a world alive and inviting. The bird's cry echoed in his dream, strong and clear, a promise of tomorrow. When he awoke, hours later, the wind had quieted to a whisper. The fire's embers glowed faintly, and outside, the storm had spent its fury, leaving a gentle hush. Ethan rose, muscles stiff but spirits renewed. He stared at the eagle's empty ledge and realized that his guide had flown on, its duty fulfilled. Stepping toward the cave mouth, Ethan took a deep breath of the crisp post-storm air. His eyes adjusted to the soft light of dawn, and as he peered out, he saw ridges dusted with fresh snow, their contours now clear and welcoming. In that moment, he understood that he was no longer at the mercy of the blizzard. He had found sanctuary, reclaimed hope, and was ready to follow the next path, one that would lead him home. When Ethan pushed through the cave's mouth at dawn, the world that greeted him was transformed. Overnight, the storm had spent itself, leaving a hush so complete it felt sacred. The sky overhead was the purest pale blue, and the snow lay undisturbed, sparkling like countless diamonds under the morning sun. He paused on the ledge, breathing in the crisp air. With muscles stiff and joints protesting, he crept forward, following a faint animal track that curved down the mountainside. Every step felt tentative at first. After days of survival mode, the simplest motions were new again, but gradually his confidence returned. The weight of fear that had pressed on him so heavily was gone, replaced by a quiet strength born of endurance. As he descended, Ethan's eyes swept the valley below. In the distance, smoke curled lazily from a ranger station's chimney. A narrow trail wound through a copse of pines, and beyond that, he could just make out the dark shapes of buildings, a sign of life he hadn't dared imagine he'd see again. He walked steadily, each crunch of snow underfoot echoing in the still air. Memories of the blizzard, the biting wind, the desperate chase of the eagle, the searing cold, faded with every yard he gained. In their place grew gratitude, for the hidden cave shelter, for the trickle of water that revived him, for the strength he'd discovered within. As the ranger station rose into view, Ethan's pace quickened. A patrol jeep was parked outside, and two uniformed rangers stood on the porch, coffee mugs in hand. Their sharp eyes had already spotted him, and relief shone in their expressions even before he called out. "Sir! Are you all right?" one ranger shouted, hurrying down the steps. He crossed the snow to Ethan, enveloping him in a warm, emergency blanket. The second ranger radioed for medical support, and soon a third joined them, carrying a thermos of hot tea. Ethan sank gratefully onto the porch's bench, tears stinging his eyes as he wrapped the blanket tighter. He looked up at the rangers, voice thick when he spoke. I thought I was done for. But something led me here, an eagle. It guided me out of the storm." The rangers exchanged astonished glances. The older ranger, a woman with kindly eyes, knelt beside him. "An eagle, you say? You're lucky to be alive." She checked his vitals quickly. "Hypothermia's no joke, but you look like you fought through the worst." They gave him hot tea and radioed the rescue crew that he was stable. While he drank, Ethan's gaze drifted to the ridgeline above the station. There, perched on a tall fir, sat a solitary golden eagle, its head turned as if watching him. For a moment, man and bird held each other's eyes in silent recognition before the eagle spread its wings and lifted into the morning sky. Ethan watched until the bird was just a speck against the blue. His heart swelled with wonder. In that instant, he understood that his survival was never a matter of chance. It had been a choice, his choice to follow hope, no matter how faint, and the eagle's choice to guide him when he needed it most. The rescuers helped him into the jeep's heated cab, and as they drove toward the valley road, Ethan pressed himself against the window, watching the mountains recede. Each snow-clad peak gleamed, telling stories of danger and beauty, of fear and resilience. He felt a profound connection to that wild world, a promise that he, too, had the strength to weather any storm. By the time the jeep reached the ranger station's shelter, word of his ordeal had spread. A small crowd gathered, fellow hikers, a couple of park volunteers, even the station's director. They greeted him with cheers and warm blankets and the kind of hugs that speak louder than words. Ethan smiled through the fatigue and tears. He realized he would carry this story, and the eagle's part in it, for the rest of his life. He would return here one day, better equipped, better prepared, but still with the same sense of wonder, still ready to stand against the wild when it tested him. For now, though, as hot soup was placed in his hands and warm voices surrounded him, he simply leaned back and let it sink in. He was safe. He was alive. And he had been led home by wings of hope.